Hello, my name is Claire Morgan, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet one in the family, the one who gave up her seat, her savings, her space just to keep the peace. A few months ago, my parents told me not ask me to let my sister move into my house. They said it was just temporary. But what happened next? No one expected. Not even them. I always thought this house was a promise, until I realized to them it was just a convenience. The attic smelled like cedar and insulation dust particles dancing like ghosts in the late afternoon light. I'd meant only to find the spare smoke detector batteries, but instead, I found the box Grandpa Halden's old lock-top chest tucked behind a pile of mismatched quilts. It had the same worn brass latch I remembered from childhood, the corners frayed from years of careful loving use. My fingers hesitated at first, brushing away cobwebs before I flipped the latch. Inside it smelled of old paper and linseed oil like his den used to. Stacked neatly beneath a faded blue flannel shirt were envelopes, a pair of reading glasses, and a single white envelope marked in Grandpa's tight, deliberate cursive. "Claire, when you're ready." I swallowed. My throat had gone dry. I didn't know if I was ready, but I opened it anyway. "Keep this deed close," the letter began. Some people call it family, others call it leverage. Don't confuse the two. I sat down hard on the attic floor, the insulation pressing into my jeans. The letter was dated 7 years ago, 3 months before his heart attack. His tone was calm, but not soft. Not the version of him who used to tell bedtime stories in a rocking chair. No, this was the man who served in Korea, who built his fortune without apologies, and who, when I turned 26, called me into his study and handed me the deed to this house with one firm sentence: "It's yours now, no matter what your mother says." Back then, I didn't understand the weight of those words. Now I did. I looked around the attic at the solid bones of the place. Grandpa had bought the house in the 70s, restored it room by room with his own hands. When I moved in, I kept everything functional, but sparse 2 bedrooms, 1 bathwood floors that creaked just enough to remind me I was alive. I'd added bookshelves, new locks, a few cozy lamps. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. More than that, it was earned. A vibration broke the stillness. My phone, balanced on a nearby rafter, buzzed with a group text. "Mom, dinner this Sunday. Come hungry. No question mark. No, can you make it?" Just the same old assumption that I'd drop everything to appear. Like the years I spent pulling away meant nothing. Like this house didn't represent a boundary she resented, but couldn't touch. My thumb hovered over the screen. The usual tightness bloomed in my chest, a sensation I'd learned to recognize obligation disguised as affection. My mother had a way of making every invitation feel like a demand, every favor feel like a test. I didn't reply. Instead, I reread the letter. His script curved with patience, like each word had been sharpened over time. Toward the end, his tone shifted. "I know you love them. I did too. But love without clarity turns into sacrifice. Don't let kindness get confused with silence." I exhaled slowly, my breath fogging up a pane of dusty attic glass. Beneath me, the old floorboards didn't creak. They held me. They always had. I tucked the letter back into its envelope, slid it into my sweatshirt pocket. The box went back into place, not hidden but settled. When I stood, the low beam above me caught my shoulder. I didn't flinch. Downstairs, the house was quiet, safe. The late October light slanted across the worn kitchen tiles, and the kettle on the stove clicked as it cooled. I poured a cup of tea that had gone lukewarm while I was upstairs and leaned against the counter. The silence wasn't heavy, it was full of choices. I took one more look at the phone. Still no second message, no follow-up. Just the same old rhythm, her words, my silence, the great unbridgeable space between. Maybe I'd go Sunday. Maybe I wouldn't. But tonight, I'd found something more enduring than their approval. Claire whispers, "You knew this was coming, didn't you, before sealing the letter back into its envelope?" We never yelled at each other. We just made silence an instrument of war. The table was set with linen napkins and the good plates ivory with the faint gold rim my mother insisted made everything taste more civil. There was a rosemary roast in the oven, a bottle of Chardonnay sweating in a silver chiller, and 3 forks at every place setting. I had done all of it. Elaine Mother had simply arrived in a floral wrap dress and a tightly coiled smile, complimenting the arrangement as though I were her event planner, not her daughter. Ronald sat straight as a ruler, already holding court with Melissa before the first course was even served. He wore a navy sport coat, his cufflinks glinting under the pendant light, and his voice carried with its usual air of finality, like whatever he said had already been decided in some higher ledger the rest of us couldn't access. Melissa arrived 10 minutes late, of course. She made lateness feel like a signature move, a casual shrug of superiority. She breezed through the door in a cloud of vanilla perfume. Faux surprise at my living room. Oh wow, you kept the original trim as though I'd inherited a museum, not a home. We sat. Small talk fluttered across the table like a nervous bird always threatening to smash into the windows. Elaine asked about my freelance editing work. Before I could answer, Ronald cut in to describe Melissa's latest consulting contract, how it was a strategic realignment for a mid-market firm. Melissa added that it was exhausting but invigorating, like a massage that bruised the soul. I passed the bread. I forgot how charming this place is, Melissa said, eyes scanning the room with mild appraisal. It's got that transitional charm. Like it's between someone old moving out and someone new moving in. I gave a non-committal hum, cutting the roast into thick slices. The knife pressed through it cleanly, but my grip was rigid. Elaine's voice rose syrupy and bright. That's exactly what we were hoping you'd say. I paused, the carving knife hovering midair. Ronald reached for the mustard, not looking at me. Melissa needs a reset. Time away from the city. You can accommodate her. No, could you? No, would you mind? Just you can. I blinked. Once, twice. The old buzzing started behind my ears like a small appliance turned on in the next room. She just needs somewhere stable for a few months, Elaine said gently. A safe space to land while she recenters. She has friends, I said evenly. And a lease. And I assume income. Ronald's lips pressed into a line. Family should step in before strangers do. Melissa smiled, slow and theatrical. Claire, come on. You've always had such a big heart. Remember when you gave me your birthday money sophomore year so I could buy heels for debate finals? I remembered. What she didn't mention was that she borrowed it without asking. I was 12. I just thought we'd talk about it, I said. Not stage it like a reveal party. Ronald's fork paused mid-lift. Don't be dramatic. I looked at Elaine, who wilted under my gaze. Did you mean to ask me? I said, voice quieter than I intended. Or just announce it? The air flattened. Even the clink of cutlery had stopped. Melissa sipped her wine. I figured you'd want to help. You're always so accommodating. I've said yes so many times I forgot what a no sounded like in my own voice. The cursor blinked on the screen like a metronome for dread. I was supposed to be editing the final pages of a memoir draft, something about grief and rivers and lost shoes, but the words refused to stay in place. They slithered off the screen, turned into noise, or rearranged themselves into emails I hadn't answered and texts I didn't want to read. The house was silent except for the clicking of the baseboard heater and the occasional groan from the refrigerator. But I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was leaning just beyond the edge of my vision, like the walls were breathing with anticipation. I pushed away from the desk. My coffee had gone cold again. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside. The neighborhood looked normal. Damp leaves scattered across driveways, a jogger passing with earbuds and a squirrel twitching on a power line. Nothing to suggest that something inside me was cracking loose. The phone rang. I let it buzz once, twice before answering. Claire Diane's voice came through with gentle concern. You sound like someone trying to disappear into their own chair. I tried to chuckle, but it landed flat. Is it that obvious I've worked with you for 8 years? You start cutting modifiers when you're upset. You just emailed me a chapter summary with the phrase, existentially redundant. Fair. She paused. Want to talk about it? I hesitated. She wasn't just my freelance editor. Diane had become something of a professional tether, someone who saw my mind clearly even when I didn't. I feel like my house is shrinking around me, I said. Like every room is a corner. The line went quiet, but not with disinterest. I think I said yes too quickly again. Melissa, of course, Melissa. Diane exhaled. Boundaries are, yeah, I know, healthy, necessary, therapeutic, and terrifying, she said. Especially when you were never taught you're allowed to have them. That landed. After the call, I found myself standing in front of my file cabinet, unsure why I'd walked over. My fingers traced the labels like braille. Tax returns, mortgage, receipts. Then one drawer stuck halfway. I tugged gently. It gave. Inside, beneath an old checkbook and a set of expired home warranties, was a manila envelope labeled in my own handwriting 2016 property file. I pulled it out slowly, heart already drumming faster, like my body knew what my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I opened the flap and slid out the contents. The first page was a copy of the deed. My name only. Not Elaine, not Ronald, and certainly not Melissa. Beneath that was a notarized addendum I had forgotten existed. A legal clause signed in ink that had faded slightly around the edges. It bore the name of my old lawyer friend from college, Theo Marshall. Co-occupancy restricted to primary owner approval. I reread the line 3 times. That single clause meant they couldn't force Melissa to move in no matter what family duty they waved like a banner. Legally, I was covered. I had just forgotten. Or maybe I'd buried it. My hands trembled not with fear, but with the electric flicker of remembering I had rights. That I wasn't cornered. Not entirely. Back then, I'd filed it thinking of security, not strategy. Grandpa Halden had suggested it after that first passive-aggressive conversation with Ronald about what the family expected from me and the house. I hadn't realized just how right he'd been. My phone sat on the desk, dark screen reflecting my face back at me. I picked it up, tapped out the message. Theo, I need to ask you something, and it's not just about real estate. They assumed I lived here out of sentiment. They forgot I also live here on paper. Theo's office hadn't changed. Still tucked behind a bookstore near 23rd Avenue, it smelled of old legal pads, cedar polish, and the faintest trace of sandalwood, his cologne, or maybe just the room absorbing his history. It wasn't sterile like most legal spaces. It was cluttered warm. Books leaned precariously on shelves, coffee mugs doubled as pen holders, and there was always at least one stray post-it on his desk with something scrawled in block letters. File tomorrow. Call Linda back. Buy almonds. He looked up as I walked in, offering the same familiar half-smile he'd worn since undergrad. Claire, he said. You still breathe like a librarian, trying not to be noticed. Probably because I am, I replied. He gestured to the chair across from his. Sit. You look like someone who just remembered she has leverage. I sat, handing him the folder without a word. He flipped it open. Eyes scanned the deed first, then the clause. His brow lifted slightly just once. You remembered this, I found it, I said. I didn't even realize what I'd forgotten. He nodded, tapping the page. Co-occupancy clause, notarized. My signature. Yours. Your house, your name. But you granted me a 10% stake for legal backing. You said I recalled it was better to co-list than to fight in court later. He leaned back, arms crossed. Smart past you. The room went quiet for a few moments. A fan buzzed softly in the corner, shuffling air between windows that had never quite sealed properly. Outside, someone walked past, humming. I traced a crack in the varnish of his desk. They want her to move in, I said finally. They brought it up over dinner like I was the last person to hear about it. Melissa, I nodded. Elaine smiled. Ronald stated. Melissa implied, and none of them asked. And you didn't say no, I didn't say yes. He smirked. That's growth. I looked at him. She has no legal claim, not even a hint. He flipped to the second page. Her name appears exactly 0 times. No co-signer, no listed resident, no witness on record, just family delusions and social pressure. That won't stop them from trying. No, he agreed. But it means if they try it here, they lose. Instantly. If she shows up with a suitcase, she's trespassing. I swallowed. Would you be willing to be there when they show up? Theo paused, not in hesitation but in calculation. He reached for his coffee, sipped, then set it down with purpose. They won't expect a stranger, and I won't be the one surprised. They saw a spare bedroom. I saw the last room in my life I hadn't surrendered. The upper room had always been mine in name but empty in function. I'd used it for storage, sometimes yoga, sometimes nothing at all. It was the one place in this house that still felt untouched by performance expectation or compromise. And now, it was about to be claimed. Melissa arrived on a bright Saturday morning, trailed by Ronald's SUV idling too long in the driveway, and Elaine's pixelated smile chirping in from a FaceTime window. They hadn't even knocked. Ronald opened the back hatch like he was dropping off donations. She only brought the essentials: 3 suitcases, 2 garment bags, a ring light. Melissa needs space, Elaine offered from the phone screen, her voice fuzzed with poor reception. Somewhere to breathe, to heal. I have windows, I said flatly, but no one heard. Melissa breezed in like it was already hers, flipping her sunglasses onto her head eyes, scanning everything from my hallway rug to the art prints on my wall. Wow, she said, with exaggerated brightness. This place got cozier. She climbed the stairs without waiting, hauling one suitcase behind her, tossing a "you don't mind" right over her shoulder. I didn't answer. I just listened to the wheels thump against each stair. She chose the bigger of the 2 upstairs bedrooms. Of course she did. Never mind that I'd repainted the smaller one just last spring, or that the larger room still had scuffs from a wardrobe I never finished moving. Melissa liked space. She considered it her birthright. I stood by the doorway as she twirled inside, stretching her arms wide. Perfect light. This'll be great for journaling. She turned toward me. And content, obviously. She placed her phone against the window frame, angled just so, and launched into a chirpy voice I hadn't heard in years, her influencer cadence. Okay, guys, so I just moved into my healing space. It's my sister's home, and she's been so gracious letting me crash while I recenter. Wait till you see this view. I almost laughed, but it got caught behind my molars. Downstairs, Ronald gave me a firm nod, the kind that suggested this was the close of a business transaction. Elaine said she'd check in later as if she were managing a plant. And then they were gone. The door closed. Melissa was home. I retreated to the couch that night, the one in the living room with the 2 firm cushions and the slight lean to the left. I lay on my back blanket to chin eyes wide open. The silence was no longer the kind I chose. It had weight now. Mass direction. It settled on my chest like another occupant. Somewhere upstairs, Melissa laughed into her phone. At 2:12 a.m., I rose. The floor creaked in its familiar rhythm under my feet. I walked to the printer in the hall closet and fed in 2 sheets. 1 page, 1 agreement. Occupancy contingent upon dual authorization signed by me and Theo. Melissa's name absent, entirely. I left the paper on the kitchen counter right beside the oat milk and her probiotic gummies. Not hidden, not explained. Just waiting. I picked up my phone and typed the message with steady fingers. They're in. You know what to do. They took my stillness as surrender. But even ambushes require quiet. The rain started sometime before dawn on Sunday, just a light whisper on the windows. Melissa was already up. It seemed her phone buzzed relentlessly from the upstairs landing, her voice animated in a half-laughing conversation about energy mapping and airflow blocks. I sat at the kitchen table, stirring cold coffee with a spoon I hadn't used in years. The house didn't feel smaller, just divided. Like it had been cleaved with a dull blade down the center, and now everything I touched had someone else's fingerprints on it. She had moved fast. Within 48 hours, the hallway had acquired a vintage runner she rescued from a consignment app. The shared bathroom bore lavender-scented hand soap I never bought. A motivational quote in a brass frame. Your healing offends those committed to their version of you now stood beside the toaster. Monday, she brought in 2 friends. They wore boots on the rugs and opened windows I always kept closed. They called the place Boho Retreat meets Portland, Nest, and spoke of future brunches. Melissa poured wine like a landlady and gestured through rooms with phrases like my nook and my vision board corner. I didn't argue. I vacuumed my office instead, slowly, deliberately. I locked drawers I hadn't opened in weeks. I scanned shelves, noted what books were out of place, and made a mental map of where things belonged. That night, I texted Theo 4 photos: the bedroom, the office, the kitchen, the front porch. One had Melissa's bag by the door. One showed the calendar she hung above the sink. I included a simple caption, ongoing possession in progress, confirming documentation, still silent on my end. Theo replied 10 minutes later. Perfect. Keep letting them write the story themselves. On Tuesday, it came. I'd just finished editing a chapter from a novel about betrayal. The kind where no one knows they're being set up until the penultimate scene, when Melissa peeked into the room without knocking. "You're still using the sunroom, huh?" I looked up. "It has a heater vent and good light." She stepped in barefoot on the hardwood. "Yeah," I figured. "But I've been thinking, it's got better feng shui than the upstairs space. I'm converting it into a yoga studio. Your books can go in the garage." I nodded once. "That sounds fair." She smiled, thinking she'd won something. Then she left humming. I picked up my phone, hands steady. Sunday, 10 a.m., front door. I hit send. It wasn't the insults that hurt. It was how easily they expected I'd endure them. There's a specific weight to silence, the kind that doesn't come from peace, but from being systematically disregarded. It doesn't roar. It soaks into the drywall, into your clothes, into your breath, until even the air feels indifferent to your presence. Saturday evening. The kitchen light hummed above Melissa's new centerpiece, eucalyptus stems and a glass vase surrounded by 3 votive candles. The tablecloth was different now, too, beige with tiny gold stars. I'd never bought it. I hadn't even noticed it arrive. Upstairs, her music thumped faintly. I could tell from the tempo that she was doing her makeup or shooting another video. Probably both. I slipped into my office and opened the locked drawer. Inside, a fireproof case I hadn't touched in years. I laid it on the floor and clicked it open, packing deliberately. Birth certificate, passport. The folder labeled estate and legal. USB drive marked backups. Grandpa Halden's pocket watch, which no longer ticked, but always felt like it should. I clicked the case shut and slid it under my desk. My phone vibrated. A missed call from Ava, a friend who'd offered her guest room for the night. I didn't answer. She'd understand. She always did. Instead, I opened the Notes app, typed 3 lines addressed to Elaine. "Mom, you once told me being quiet was my best quality. That was never a compliment, was it?" I stared at the words until they stopped meaning anything, then deleted them. Not out of mercy, out of clarity. I sat on the edge of my bed, pulled up the voice memo app, hit record. This time, I said softly, "I'm not the one leaving." It was the closest I'd come to a declaration in months. I stood stretched and walked out into the chilly dusk. The mailbox stood at the edge of the walkway like a sentry with no interest in the war inside. I slid in a sealed envelope addressed in black ink. Homeowners Association, immediate review. Requested inside was a printed notice of unauthorized occupancy, signed and dated. No accusations, just facts. Melissa's lights blazed behind me as I returned inside. I didn't bother turning them off. Let her enjoy the illusion. My phone buzzed again. "Theo, I'll be at the door by 9:58. Let them knock first." They expected gratitude. They met a witness. The sky was the color of wet slate when the doorbell rang. Not quite raining, but damp enough to smear sound. I stood behind the living room curtain, out of sight, watching the 3 of them approach from the sidewalk. Melissa let her suitcase wheels clattering against the uneven concrete like a prelude. Ronald followed with brisk steps, shoulders squared as if attending a boardroom negotiation. Elaine trailed behind, clutching a beige cardigan around her like a shield. They were dressed too nicely for a Sunday morning. They'd expected applause. Or maybe a second act. But they got Theo. He opened the door at exactly 9:58 a.m., crisp in a dark suit, expression neutral. No smile, no apology. Just presence. Authority in corded stillness. Melissa's lips parted to speak, but Theo was faster. "You do not have the right to enter this home." Ronald stepped forward. "Excuse me, who the hell are you?" Theo didn't blink. "Legal co-owner. Claire and I executed joint tenancy in 2016. 10% ownership, full consent rights on occupancy. That includes refusal of cohabitation with any third party." Elaine gasped, the sound small and high, as if someone had pulled a string in her throat. Melissa blinked. "This is my family's house." "No," Theo said calmly. "This is Claire's house, and you are not a legal resident." Ronald tried to push past him, but Theo didn't move. He didn't raise his voice, didn't touch anyone, just stood like the line they didn't think existed. There is an HOA record, he added, and a pending notice filed this morning citing unauthorized occupation. Should you step foot inside again, legal action will follow. Trespassing. Violation of community covenants. Harassment if necessary. Ronald scoffed. We're just here to help our daughter get settled. Theo raised a single brow. She is not a tenant. She is a guest who never had consent to stay. Melissa looked at me then, because by now, I'd stepped forward. I stood in the hallway, arms crossed. The same clothes as last night, hair unbrushed, but I'd never felt more prepared in my life. She stared, eyes wide-faced, twitching between confusion and indignation. You told me I had no spine, I said evenly. I'm here to prove that cartilage is smarter than steel. Ronald turned toward me. You went behind our backs. No, I said, voice flat. I finally stood in front of them. Elaine looked like she might cry, but this time, I didn't move to comfort her. Melissa's voice cracked. You tricked us. I looked her straight in the eye. No, I just finally read the paperwork you ignored. They didn't storm off. They evaporated because, what was left to say, the door clicked shut, but the air didn't settle. It hung heavy like a curtain left mid-sway. Theo stood near the threshold, still calm, still unreadable. I watched him adjust his cuff. No urgency, just precision, while outside the sound of someone dragging a suitcase over gravel scraped against the last threads of decorum. Ronald had been the last to speak. You'll regret this, all of you. He hadn't shouted it. He didn't need to. He used that low boardroom baritone, the one that once froze negotiations, silenced waiters, made teachers stammer. But not this time. Theo met his eyes not with defiance, just with something heavier. Pity, perhaps. Or weariness. You'll lose, he'd said. And worse, you'll look foolish doing it. Melissa had been halfway down the porch steps when she heard it. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes glossed. She didn't respond. Elaine trembling beside the flower pot she used to praise every visit so tasteful Claire tried one last time. A soft whisper. This is your family. I looked at her. Really looked. The perfectly pleated blouse, the too thin wrists, the permanent flinch in her posture. It would have been easy to soften, to relent. But peace is a form of loyalty too. So is peace, I told her. The three of them stood there a second longer, as if time itself was giving them one final chance to rewrite their lines. Then Ronald turned. Melissa followed, dragging her last suitcase too fast, too hard. The wheels caught on the threshold. She yanked it through like she was gutting the house. A minute later, the sound came sharp, crystalline. I stepped outside. A picture frame lay shattered on the porch stones, face down. I didn't need to flip it over. I knew which one it was. The only photo of all four of us together. 4th of July, 2002. Ronald had red plastic cups in both hands. Melissa wore braces and pride. Elaine had sunglasses over her eyes, though we were already in shade. And me, I was in the corner, cropped by accident. Or maybe not. I swept the shards into a dustpan one by one, careful not to cut myself. No ceremony, just gravity. Back inside, I closed the door and locked it. For the first time, the lock was mine. Not a defense, not a plea, a choice. Theo was still there, standing quietly in the hallway. I walked towards him, the floors steady underfoot. They'll never come back, I said almost to myself. But I think I'm still here. The house creaked like always, but now it sounded like breathing, not breaking. I hadn't realized how quiet it could be when I wasn't bracing for voices. No footsteps upstairs. No click of borrowed heels. No perfume seeping through the air vents. Just the structure itself, old wood shifting in its frame, radiators sighing into their cycle, alive in its own way. I opened the upstairs window and let the breeze in. It carried the last breath of October, cool and edged with rain. The curtains moved like lungs. I stripped the bedding Melissa had brought, stuffing it into a contractor's bag, her sage-scented candles, the influencery mugs, her lavender pillow spray, all gone. The upper room felt bigger somehow, or maybe it had just stopped recoiling. I brought up a small framed quote I'd kept tucked in my office drawer for years. Grandpa's handwriting in faded ink. A house has no soul until you choose not to leave it. I placed it on the windowsill and lit a single candle beside it. The flame wavered for a moment, then steadied. Back downstairs, I poured myself a glass of water and stood in the middle of the living room. Diane had texted 10 minutes ago. Diane. You did it. I smiled faintly, thumbs hovering above the screen before typing Claire not done, but begun. My phone buzzed again. Theo. I answered on speaker. Checking in, he said. I'm breathing, I replied, which is new. Keep doing it, he said, and I could hear his smile. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. After we hung up, I opened my laptop for the first time in days. The screen glowed softly against the dusk seeping in through the windows. I'd meant to draft an email, but instead my fingers found the blog dashboard I hadn't touched in over a year. The template loaded. Blank. I typed a title, The Family You Outgrow. It blinked at me, waiting. I exhaled, a breath that felt less like release and more like permission. My fingers returned to the keys. Let me tell you what silence really sounds like. Sometimes closure doesn't knock. Sometimes it never even looks your way. It had rained overnight, not a dramatic downpour, just a steady hush that left behind cold sidewalks and puddles filled with last week's leaves. When I stepped outside, everything felt rinsed but not clean, just quieter. Back at the office, the elevator smelled like wet coats and stale paper. Familiar, almost comforting. I passed the kitchenette where someone had overfilled the Keurig and left droplets of dark roast on the counter like footprints. Diane saw me before I reached my desk. You're quieter, she said, tilting her head, but taller. I smiled. Maybe I'm just standing up straighter. She nodded. Whatever it is, it suits you. My desk was exactly how I left it. Sticky note reminders clinging with too much optimism, a mug I forgot to wash out, and the manuscript I'd half finished before the family dinner detonated my spine. I logged in, opened my inbox. 64 unread messages. One text stood out at the top of the screen, a banner notification from Melissa still unread. You made this a war. Don't expect sympathy or forgiveness. I stared at it for a few seconds. My thumb hovered. Then slowly, deliberately, I slid it left and tapped delete. I didn't even open it. Vivian, my senior colleague, appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee. She didn't say hello, just handed me one. I figured today calls for extra caffeine, she said, settling into the chair beside my desk. I nodded. It's weird being back. She sipped, then looked over the rim of her cup. Letting go isn't defeat, she said quietly. It's permission. My throat tightened. She didn't need to explain. We all have our unseen wars. Back at my screen, I opened the dashboard for Medium. My cursor blinked in an empty title field. When the sorry never comes, I stared at it for a while. A piece of me still wanted to wait, to give Melissa another day, another week, another chance. But I'd done that before. I started typing. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a plea. It was a record, a scar that no longer bled but still tingled in the cold. I wrote until the coffee was gone, until the lights behind me had dimmed slightly with the passing clouds, until the silence inside me felt like space instead of absence. Then I did something I'd never done before. I hit publish. I used to think I lived behind walls. Then I realized I built them with intention. The upstairs room no longer smelled like lavender spray and mascara. It smelled like wood shavings and open windows, like varnish warming in the autumn sun. It smelled like change. Cal stood by the far corner, sanding block in hand, running long strokes across the baseboards with a kind of reverence. He was slow not because of age, but because he understood that some spaces don't rush their transformation. This floor's solid, he said, peering over his glasses. Held a lot, I'd bet. More than it ever should have, I replied, pulling painter's tape along the window trim. Jazz murmured from the speaker on the windowsill. Not the flashy kind, just something soft with brushed drums and a saxophone that sounded like it remembered heartbreak. It filled the space the way grief once had, except now it didn't echo. It pulsed. Cal and I didn't speak much after that. Just the rhythm of work, the scrape of old paint, the hum of the orbital sander, the clink of a new screw driven into place. Around midday, I unboxed Grandpa's typewriter. I'd kept it in storage, unsure where it belonged in my life. Now I set it gently on the new oak shelf beneath the window. It caught the light. I could almost hear the keys whispering stories that never made it to paper. By late afternoon, the room was different. Not just clean claimed, new curtains hung with calm folds, books organized by emotion, not title. A low lamp threw amber across the walls. I sat cross-legged on the floor and just breathed. That's when I saw it. An unread email had nudged its way into my inbox from a women's nonprofit in town, Portland Voices. Subject: Community Circle Invitation Body. We're launching a storytelling series for women navigating family estrangement, loss, or transition. Would you be open to hosting one session in your space? My fingers hovered. I didn't have to think. Reply yes. My house is ready now. No justification, no long explanation, just truth. When Cal returned from packing up his tools, I showed him the small nameplate I'd ordered earlier in the week. I hadn't known exactly where I'd put it until now. He read it, smiled, and nodded once. That evening, I stood in the upstairs hallway, centered the nameplate on the white door, and pressed it flat against the wood. Quiet Rebellion, Thursdays, 6:09 p.m. I always wondered what I'd say if Melissa showed up again. Turns out I didn't need words. It had been raining since noon. Not the misty Portland drizzle, but a full, unashamed downpour that slapped windows and drowned gutters. I'd lit a few candles early, partly for warmth, partly for the quiet company they offered. The house was calm, the chairs arranged in a circle for tonight's gathering, pillows fluffed just so. Theo had texted to say he'd drop off the tea thermos by 6. Everything was ready. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't time yet. No one from the group was due for another 30 minutes. I peeked through the window. Melissa. She stood under the porch light, soaked through, holding a duffel bag like a shield. Her coat clung to her arms, hair matted, lips pale. But it was the eyes that held me still, not pleading, not defiant, just tired. I opened the door halfway. She didn't speak right away. I have nowhere else tonight, she said finally. The pause stretched between us like wet rope. She didn't ask to come in, just stood there, the water beating off her bag onto the mat. My silence wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. I wasn't sure what it was. It just was. Towels are in the bathroom, I said. Couch only. She nodded once. The bag thudded against the wood as she stepped inside. She didn't comment on the rearranged furniture, or the candlelight, or the circle of chairs in the living room. Her eyes took it all in quietly, like someone stepping into a stranger's house with echoes of something they used to know. I handed her a dry sweatshirt and gestured toward the hallway. She disappeared without a word. The kettle hissed in the background. I turned it off and wiped the counter. Melissa returned wearing the sweatshirt too big for her. Her hair was towel-dried now, curling at the ends like it used to when we were kids. She sat on the edge of the couch, fingers tangled in the hem of her sleeve. This is different, she said finally. It's mine, I answered. More silence. Then, without meeting my gaze, she asked, Are you always this cold? Now I didn't flinch. No, just finely calibrated. She flinched for me. There were no apologies, no justifications, no stories about how she ended up here or why she thought I might still say yes. She didn't need to. I wasn't asking. The clock clicked toward 6. I stood and picked up the folded blanket from the basket. I have guests arriving soon, I said. You'll be gone in the morning. She nodded. I handed her the blanket. She didn't say thank you. I didn't ask for it. Upstairs, I paused outside the guest room door. Not Melissa's old room. Not mine. Just a room with clean sheets, a night lamp, and space enough for one person to breathe. I closed the door behind me, not locking it, just closing. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had echoes in other people's throats. The chairs were already set when the first knock came. A soft rap on wood, hesitant like a breath caught halfway. I opened the door to a woman with sharp cheekbones and unsure eyes. She clutched a leather notebook like it might fly away. Claire, she asked. I nodded. One by one they arrived. 6 women in total, different ages, different shoes, different scars. But something in their movements said the same thing. They had been practicing silence for years and were now trying to unlearn it. We didn't start with stories, just tea. The room smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Rain patted the windows softly. The circle of chairs felt less like a structure and more like shelter. Each woman had a small notepad on her lap, a pen balanced between her fingers. I thought we could begin with a question, I said, settling into my chair. What's one sentence you wish someone had said to you? Back then? A pause. Then a woman with deep-set eyes whispered, "You didn't deserve it." Another, "You can stop running now." A third, her voice trembling, "You don't have to make sense of their cruelty." We moved around the circle like that. No pressure, no corrections. Just declarations finally spoken aloud. Vivian arrived last. She didn't knock. Just quietly stepped through the door I'd left unlocked. She wore a navy scarf and carried no bag, no notebook. Just herself. When it was her turn, she folded her hands in her lap and said, "I wish someone told me I didn't owe silence to anyone." It was then I knew I'd done something right. I reached for the journal in my lap, the one I'd hidden for over a decade. Its cover was frayed, the spine bent from too many nights wedged under a mattress. I opened to a page scrawled in teenage cursive, the ink slightly smeared from an old tear. I hate that I smile when I don't want to, that I say I'm fine when I want to scream. I hate that when people say I'm sensitive, I hear "you're not strong enough." I wish I had a voice. I wish I had a door that locked. I looked up. No one spoke for a moment. Then the woman across from me, curly hair, slight stutter, said simply, "You weren't weak. You were surviving." The room exhaled. For the first time, I didn't feel like a host or a survivor or a lesson. I didn't feel like I had to lead or protect or translate my pain into something palatable. I just was. Claire's smiles, not as host, not as survivor, but simply present. They came back. But this time, I didn't wait to be chosen. I chose. It was the smell of rosemary bread in the oven that made me pause. A scent so warm, so present, I almost missed the footsteps on the front porch. The doorbell rang. I already knew who it was. Through the front window, I glimpsed a familiar silhouette, Elaine holding a foil-wrapped dish. Ronald trailed a few steps behind, carrying nothing, his hands stuffed into the pockets of a winter coat I remembered from my childhood. I took a deep breath, pressed my palm against the solid frame of the door, and opened it. "Hi," Elaine said, trying for a smile. "Lemon tart, your favorite." "It was never mine," I replied gently. "But thank you for bringing it." She hesitated, then stepped inside. Ronald nodded once, curt. He looked around like he expected a cross-examination or a trap. I simply gestured toward the living room where chairs circled the coffee table, already filled with dishes stew, from Diane, wine from Theo, a tray of thumbprint cookies from one of the women in the writing circle. Melissa came in 10 minutes later. No fanfare. No complaints. Her hair was damp from the rain, and she carried only her phone and a plastic container of fruit. She placed it down silently, glanced around, and found a corner seat without prompting. Theo waved from the dining room. Vivian was arranging napkins. The room buzzed with soft chatter, the kind that filled spaces like music. Strangers, no, not strangers, chosen kin. None of them owed me history, but every one of them offered presents. Elaine sat beside Diane, murmuring something about her lemon tart recipe. Ronald took a seat and said, little eyes scanning the bookshelf like it was a tax document. Melissa avoided my gaze. That was fine. Near the end of the meal, I rose and clinked a spoon lightly against my glass. The room hushed, not the silence of fear, but the one that listens. "I've lived in this house alone," I said, "but never quite lonely. Not really." Because over time, people showed up who didn't just take space, but brought warmth. Eyes turned toward the women from the circle, toward Theo, Vivian, Diane. I continued. Family isn't always the ones who raised you. Sometimes they're the ones who stayed, who witnessed, who listened when it didn't benefit them, who told you you weren't crazy, just unheard. Elaine shifted. Ronald stared at his wine. "So tonight," I said, lifting my glass, "I want to toast not to what was lost, but what was found. To the family you build when the old one forgets how to hold you." The clinking of glasses was quiet, almost reverent. Later, as people began to trickle out, Melissa approached me at the door. She stood awkwardly, arms crossed, then finally said, "You built something real here." I met her gaze for the first time that evening. Yes, I did. She opened her mouth to say something else, then closed it. The door shut softly behind her. Elaine and Ronald didn't stay long after. No dramatic farewells, no accusations, just nods and the shuffle of shoes at the threshold. When they were gone, I stood in the hallway a long time listening to the new quiet. Not the silence I'd once drowned in. This one had space. I picked up the last empty glass and set it in the kitchen sink. Then I walked to the door of the room upstairs, the one that had once held an unwanted guest, then a paintbrush, then a circle of women finding their voices. I walked into her writing room, closed the door softly, and began a new page. Chapter 1. They thought silence meant surrender, but silence, when chosen, becomes strategy. In a house once claimed without consent, justice didn't shout. It arrived in the form of paper presents and proof. And when cruelty dressed as family was finally turned away at the door, dignity stepped in and took its rightful seat. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but when it does, it echoes for generations. If you've ever been told your voice was too small, remember, even whispers can bring down empires. Like if this story moved you. Share if you know someone who needs to hear it. Comment 1 if you felt seen. Comment 2 if you'd choose a different ending.